Hi, everyone. It's Michelle here with the Sleep Coach School, and I'm back with another open class. And today I'm joined by Beth. Coach Beth, I'm glad that you've updated the banner. Hi, Beth. How are you doing?
Good, good. Yes, Michelle, I passed my test, so I got to add coach to my name.
Very exciting. Well, I'm so happy to have you here today to do another open class, and we'll have to keep inviting you back and doing more and more of these.
Well, thanks for having me on the show.
Perfect. So let's dive into our first question. All right. Our first question is from Sebastian. He says, "Hi, all of you lovely people. I've had a depressive episode, and then I began to have trouble sleeping. I've been sleeping better and better after I found your YouTube channel, and now I'm completely done with sleeping meds. But I struggle to tackle the problem of waking up in the middle of the night. I've started with a timeless sleep window, which works great, but I don't know the right action towards this problem of waking up during the night. I try to be natto about it, but still, is there anything else to think or to do? Kind regards, Sebastian." Well, thanks for sending that in. I know that Beth and I have some thoughts about this. Also, very, very common to be waking up in the middle of the night and having trouble to go back to sleep. So, first, just know how incredibly common this is. And with that, I'll pass it over to Beth. Beth, what do you think?
Yeah, well, Sebastian, thank you so much for writing in. I'm so glad to hear that your sleep is improving and you found the channel, and congratulations on getting off your sleep meds. I know what a good feeling that is from experience. And so it just sounds like you have some concerns still about waking up in the middle of the night. And so, like we often talk about on the channel, it's not so much waking up in the middle of the night that is a problem. It's what the mind believes about waking up in the middle of the night that will sort of determine our response to it. So I'm just sort of looking for clues in the writing or in how this is being expressed and what the mind is doing about waking up in the middle of the night, and this struggle to tackle the problem of waking up, tells me that your mind is sort of perceiving that as something that shouldn't be happening. And it may be reassuring to know that all of us are waking up in the middle of the night, sometimes many, many times, 10 to 20 times a night. And that's really a good thing, because we've sort of evolved to do this as a measure of safety. We wake up and we, sort of check our surroundings and we go back to bed, which is good in case there's a fire or anything else. So that means that, your brain is working just right. Nothing's gone wrong there. And so in terms of what sort of making it a little bit more okay and teaching the brain that this is okay, this is something that happens and it's nothing to fear, you can make a little plan. You can sort of, if that happens, and I think if we were working one-on-one with you, Sebastian, we might sort of tease out, if you wake up in the middle of the night, what happens next? And if you become so awake that you feel like it's a good idea to leave the bed, then you can plan to do anything that would make it more okay to be awake at night. So that befriending wakefulness, that idea of befriending wakefulness, and this can look like anything. I know someone who just reserves that time in the middle of the night for knitting or crocheting. That's just like her time to do just that. Or, maybe there's like a book. I think you talked about that last time, Michelle, that reserving that special book for that time at night. What else? There's lots of, maybe it's a certain show on Netflix, whatever it is that you truly enjoy, just because you enjoy doing it and not because there's an intention behind there to make you sleep. So just like having a plan could really help. And I think it's great that, that you're implementing not attaching to a certain outcome. I think that's sort of the biggest key, is just being, just not having an outcome in mind, just being awake and doing something just because you love it, not because it's to go back to sleep or it has any certain purpose around sleep. So those are kind of my thoughts there. What do you think, Michelle? Like, do you know any little like I know that sometimes people have reserved that time for certain activities just to make it enjoyable.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I agree with everything you just said. It's absolutely true. And I think you mentioned this as well. This idea that it's very normal for us to be waking up at night, and sometimes with hyperarousal that we can experience with insomnia, our wake ups become more pronounced or more noticeable, and that makes us kind of freak out a little bit, and think this isn't normal. I don't remember being awake like this before, and even though you were waking up before, it's probably that you didn't really notice it as much and you probably fell back asleep more easily. But just waking up multiple times in and of itself is so normal, just like you mentioned, Beth. And it's also really common and normal to go from that experience where you might have a lot of trouble falling asleep to suddenly be able to do that and then be having the experience, Sebastian, like you're describing, where all of a sudden it's like, well, now I'm up in the middle of the night. What's going on? And it's just, it is that same hyperarousal. It is the same kind of insomnia, just showing up in a little bit of a different way. And everything that, Beth, you mentioned, absolutely. Like, how can you, Sebastian, start to kind of fully accept that you're up at night and allow that to be okay, knowing that our mental and emotional responses to what's happening is going to either kind of drive further stress in our bodies, or it's going to help calm that process down. And so I think that's kind of like the big piece of why something like befriending wakefulness can be so helpful, because it just can make us feel really safe and okay, even though, yes, it's far from ideal to actually to be awake. We don't want this, but how do we respond now that it is actually happening? And our response can really be so important, in the whole cycle. And one thing, I was just talking about this with somebody the other day, and sometimes I like to think of those middle of the night awakenings as, your brain thinks that something really stressful is happening in the middle of the night that you really need to be awake to deal with. Right? It's like every time we wake up, if we're having a stress response, which is normal to do because we don't want to be up and we don't want to be struggling. And so every time that happens and we kind of react with, that fear and that anxiety, it kind of reinforces to the brain, oh, there's really something going on in the middle of the night that he needs to be up and he needs to be awake for. And so everything that Beth was talking about is kind of working towards letting the brain know that's not the case. There's no threat happening in the middle of the night, and it's kind of helping to break that pattern. So that's what I was thinking. And Beth, do you have anything else to add to that sort of that line of advice for Sebastian, or does that kind of sum
Spot
up?
on. Yeah, it's spot on. Yep, definitely. Just sort of reteaching and helping the brain unlearn a fear,
Exactly. So Sebastian, I hope that helps. Of course, let us know in the comments below if that was helpful or if you have any follow-up. And with that, let's move to our next question over here. Our next question is from Tom. It says, hello, I've been in the battle with insomnia for about a year and a half. I was in a terrible state. I worked with Sasha Stevens, did CBT-I sleep clinics, and I have been through all the same things I have seen people try in many of your videos. I have improved since then, and I don't have panic attacks anymore. I stopped all the need for special rules, and now I just kind of deal with being awake at night. For the last 6 months, I have fluctuated between good sleep for 1 to 3 weeks, then a couple of bad days, and now the number of bad days seems to be growing. I am aware that I can't control sleep. Your videos have shown me that. I understand that I will survive. I know the more I care and try, the further away sleep becomes. And yet I can't seem to push through that final hurdle. I don't even know what the final hurdle is. As a lifelong perfectionist, I seem to desire perfection in sleep now for some reason. Got to be in bed around 10 and get at least 6 hours or I have failed. As an analyst by trade, I also evaluate my progress, which can't help. Should I be better by now? After 6 months of knowing what to do, I should be good. All I know is that I go to bed, and if after 30 minutes I am awake, Then I just lay there for hours with one thought. Why am I not asleep? I should be asleep. This is not good. Long email, but I just wanted to ask for any thoughts and say thanks for posting so many great videos. I just bought your book and plan to read it soon. Thanks, Tom. So Tom, thanks for getting in touch with this question. I'm sorry to hear that, that you're feeling like you're in this struggle. And I know that you even wrote that, it feels very much like you're still in the battle with all of this. And I certainly know what that feels like and how hard that really is. And, I think it's also interesting that I notice you have so much self-awareness around everything that's really going on. You have the awareness of your thoughts and the emotions that are coming up and about desiring perfection in your sleep and evaluating progress, all of it. So I think it's really helpful that you do have a lot of self-awareness. I think that you can use this in the process to your advantage in terms of recovering from insomnia. And what I found interesting, one of the things that really jumped out at me is you spoke a lot about how you've learned through the channel that you cannot control sleep. However, when I read your email, really I'm kind of sensing there is a need or a reaching for a lot of control. And so on the one hand, there could be an intellectual understanding on your part that sleep cannot be controlled. But on the other hand, I think there's still a lot of attempting to gain control over this issue. And, I see that when you're talking about, evaluating your sleep, pretty much every night and, needing to have that 6 hours or feeling like that, maybe you failed or the night was a failure. Those perfectionistic needs that are now being applied to sleep and essentially the chasing of the sleep. And even statements like, this should be better by now. I've been at this for 6 months. Like, why, why am I not there? This should be good. So it's like, I just want to put out there this concept that there could be this illusion that perhaps you've released all control over sleep. And even though you have a deep intellectual understanding of sleep and control, I think it's possible that there's still an attempt to really kind of grasp and control and chase sleep. So I wanted to put that out there just for your consideration around this to see if that resonates or not, because sometimes it can be hard to be aware that we're even doing that because we're in the pattern of that. That's kind of our autopilot. So it can be really hard to see. And the other thing I was thinking of is when you're talking about like, what is this final hurdle and really not knowing what it is. And what resonated with me is that, I really don't think the final hurdle, if we could even call it that, has anything to do with sleep whatsoever. I actually think the final hurdle is really more about challenging, some deeper rooted beliefs and issues like perfectionism and like shame, or redefining what success actually looks like, redefining failure and questioning failure, and maybe putting an intention around self-kindness, because I also read kind of how and sense how hard you can be on yourself, which is very common for those of us struggling with insomnia as well. So I want to stop there for a moment because I know that's a lot, and pass it over to Beth and see like what do you think about some of the things that Tom has said and his frustrations at this point.
Yeah. So many things I can build on there, Michelle. First of all, Tom, you are my people because I really, really understand the perfectionist journey.
Me too.
These are deep patterns for me that I'm still always looking to recognize in myself. So nothing has gone wrong there. This is, I think, sort of the ultimate survival mechanism of the brain to have these patterns. And I think, like Michelle said, the antidote to perfectionism is self-kindness and self-compassion. I think that's really, really important. And, I think it's also interesting how you talked about that you have all of this amazing education, with Sasha Stevens and CBT-I. and that you really intellectually understand these concepts, which is so great that you have this education. So like your thinking brain really gets it, but then there's this primal brain that is like not quite getting it. And I think sometimes that can be due to these sort of deep-seated beliefs that can be holding up the show a little bit. And the thing about insomnia and perfectionism is it's an interesting it's an interesting thing, because sleep happens in the absence of effort, and the whole perfectionism identity is built on effort, like I mean, it's really asking a lot of your brain. It's like, okay, what? You want me to do nothing? Like that is just torturous for these sort of perfectionism patterns. And I think also as a perfectionist, I can tell you that sometimes there's this sort of black and white thinking.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like, if sleep isn't good, then it's bad. Or if I don't get the right kind of sleep, or this sort of whatever perceived ideal that I have of sleep, then it doesn't even count. Like it's sort of
the day's ruined.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I very much understand this thinking. So the thing is about sleep ideals that we have is there is no such thing as perfect sleep. It's just simply not even possible. And I think what I would ask, Tom, is to ask yourself, is it okay to have imperfect sleep?
And
it okay?
If not, why is that?
Yeah, and if not, why is that? That is the journey I would investigate and look at those beliefs that's making it not okay to have imperfect sleep. And then I would even go one step further and ask, would it be okay to give yourself permission to have imperfect sleep? To just give yourself that permission. Sometimes the brain is literally just waiting on that permission. So, I just really understand. And I think just looking a little bit further into just letting go, it's like, it's about letting go instead of hanging on, and just, yeah, that's all I got. I mean, just, those things came to mind.
Yeah, no, I love that. I feel like that you verbalized that so beautifully, and that is exactly like I kind of had the same sense when I was reading this. And just like Tom, I'm also a perfectionist. I'm trying to be a recovering perfectionist, and so when I read your email, it resonated so much, and I think that's why I picked up on some of the things that we both are saying, is because in my past, I was also applying a lot of perfectionism to my sleep and even my insomnia recovery process. And it was actually sometimes where I would think, well, I get that I can't control my sleep, but I subconsciously, or flying right under the radar, I'm still trying to control, but I'm not fully aware of it. And so I kind of really relate to that, because perfectionism, which is rooted in that effort and that doing, is it's something that we tend to apply to all these different areas of our life. And it's hard to shake that. And it's hard, there's so often times where we think we're not doing it, and we are doing it because it's so deeply ingrained. And so I love what you were saying about, well, what happens if we challenge this idea of like, what happens if we don't get 6 hours of sleep? Like, why does that have to be the success? And
right,
why would that be a failure? And going deeper on the perfectionism issue, just in and of itself, because that alone, that's really helped me, just even knowing, oh, there I am applying my perfectionism to this. It helped me take a step back and realize it's okay. This doesn't need to be perfect.
Yeah.
And that it's okay to start to redefine success and failure for myself. And so, yeah, those concepts really came to mind. I think because both Beth and I really relate to this
Yeah,
challenge. We've been there. We totally get this. Um,
totally do.
so yeah, Tom, I hope that helps, and let us know in the comments below if those concepts were helpful for you.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to our next question. Our last question is from Tash. Oops, went too far there. It says, "Hi, Michelle. I hope that it's okay. This question is directed to you." Of course it is. That's so sweet. Thank you. I have large amounts of fear and anxiety during the day, all day. And no matter how many normal nights I have, I don't clock watch or have a timeline of days in a row. It doesn't really seem to make me realize that I have normal sleep. I have a normal sleep system, that I don't need to do anything, that the next day can be fine. It is like I'm a goldfish, and each day is the first day it's happening. And my mind tells me, what about tonight? Tonight it really begins. I get a flash of this image of me laying awake at night, and it's so real, like it's a foregone conclusion. I know I am not my thoughts, but before I know it, I've had the thought, and the body response is instant and lasts hours a day and night, month after month. I feel a bit stuck in Easy Rider. I have watched and read nearly everything twice, including Guy Meadows, Natto, and Set It and Forget It. Great books, by the way. So, lack of education here is not the issue. I am also a huge fan of Dr. Claire Weeks and her method, and have been implementing it daily. Listening to my brain with thought downloads, welcoming feelings, and letting them sit without judgment. I can't move past trying to accept without intent. I keep thinking I am, but when I ask myself, am I doing this to make it go away? I have to answer honestly, and of course I am. Isn't everyone to a deep level? Otherwise, why even read her book or watch the channel if we weren't trying to return to normal? I seem to be stuck in this loop. I don't know how to truly accept this. This is why this question is for you. You have been where I am, that point from full education to immunity, and you got something that I just am not. You can speak freely and give advice regularly and feel like you just sleep normally every night. When I think of those times, they seem like a fantasy of the past or will never happen again for me, truly. If I live another 50 years, that is going to be a long time to feel fear day by day. I'd love to move forward to where so many others have been able to, but I seem at a stalemate. I may be an easy rider, but my car keeps stalling and I'm going nowhere. Many thanks for everything that you guys do. So thanks for writing in that question, Tash. I really, really appreciate it. And I'm sorry that you're feeling so incredibly stuck right now. I do know exactly how you feel, and it's incredibly frustrating, especially when you feel like you mentioned, you've read the books, you're doing all the education, you feel like you really understand this stuff at an intellectual level, and just why isn't something clicking? And I totally get the frustration of feeling like you're stuck in almost like a anxiety loop that is going on repeat, which is very, very frustrating. And part of the reason that why that happens is because insomnia for us, for almost all of us, is a very emotionally intense experience, and it's really so incredibly rooted in fear. And even when our sleep improves, a lot of the time our brains can still have so much residual fear around our insomnia and around what happened in the past. And given that our brains are just these big primitive safety machines trying to keep us safe, even though you describe, listen, I'm sleeping better and it seems like it does, like my brain is not catching up with the fact that I'm having a normal sleep pattern. And it's because there's a lot of residual fear that is kind of left over, it keeps coming up to kind of say, your brain is trying to warn you, kind of saying, well, do you remember what happened? Do you remember what happened to us back here? That could happen at any moment. So we need to kind of stand guard on this issue. So it hasn't really learned to know that you are safe right now, even though you are safe. Even when you weren't sleeping, you were safe, but it's still having trouble kind of feeling that way. And part of it is that it really does take time and a lot of time and repetition to allow our brains to come to that place where they kind of settle and they feel safe enough to release certain patterns. And and that's why we tend to have a lot of up and downs along the way when we're recovering from insomnia, and that's why this doesn't happen quickly. And so it sounds like, you're still in that place where you've had a lot of improvement with your sleep, which is wonderful, but there's still some work to be done in terms of the mind and allowing the mind to realize and fully know that you are safe, in a safe place. And so that was my first thought when I was reading your words. And one of the issues here could be, you wrote about, you have all this education, you're observing your thoughts, you're doing thought downloads, you're welcoming the feelings, but that you say that, whenever you're doing these things, you can't help escape the fact that the intent is really to make it go away. It's really to get back to normal. And of course, on the one hand, you know, this is very normal. We wouldn't be doing any of this work or reading or educating ourselves if we weren't trying to change something. So I don't think the goal is to kind of attempt to trick ourselves into thinking we're not trying to work on something or change something. But on the flip side, I do think that we have to realize that when we're, let's say, observing our own thoughts, or if we're welcoming the unwelcome or doing the thought, any of the work that you're describing, Tash, if we're doing that work with that underlying intent of like almost white knuckling, right? Like, get this out of here. I hate this. Make it go away. We're really coming at this from a place of deep resistance. And as opposed to that place of coming into acceptance and almost the surrendering to what is actually happening in the present moment. And so, I know that that's really tricky, but at the same time, it sounds like you have a lot of awareness when it comes to this issue. So I do think it's worth kind of looking into that piece of, the intent behind it. It does matter. And it's one thing to say, I am working for change, but there can still be an acceptance and a surrendering to what is happening, and then acting from that place of acceptance as opposed to acting from a place of resistance. And I have a couple of other notes that I think I'll just touch on briefly before I pass over to Beth for her thoughts here. I think two concepts, and the first is at some point you mentioned that you're having this image that is flashing in your mind every single day of you laying awake at night, and then kind of that's creating a lot of anxiety for you. And that makes a lot of sense. And this made me think, there's one of the students in our group coaching program, Camilla, shared an idea and a tool that she began using with herself that I absolutely loved. And this was a visualization practice where, as opposed to visualizing herself sleeping really well and feeling great, she started visualizing herself during the day. She started visualizing herself not sleeping at night and being okay and safe, and then having a good day following that. And I thought, oh gosh, that's so interesting. I love that, because what she's doing is really visualizing her insomnia happening, but also that she's safe and okay in that moment, and that the next day is okay. And so that when it actually happens where she's up at night and she can't sleep, it's almost like her brain has already been there. It's already done that. It's primed, so to speak. And it helped kind of prevent that automatic panic loop from starting, because the brain already had this experience of being awake and things being okay and safe. And so even though she was visualizing it during the day, your brain doesn't really know the difference between if you're really visualizing versus if you're actually doing something. And so it was like it had that experience of being awake and being safe already. So when you mentioned, Tash, that image, you're having this image and this visualization flash up of you not sleeping, and this is coming up every day. I wonder if you could challenge yourself to not get rid of that image, have that image, go deeper into it, really visualize not sleeping, and see if you can add on that piece of, and you are also safe and okay, despite the fact that you are awake, and what that next day looks like. So just thought I would propose that as an exercise. And that was from one of our students, Camilla, who created that I thought was really, really cool. And then the last thing I want to mention is, at the end of your email, you talk about, kind of how do you get there? How do you get from the intellectual knowing and the education to things kind of clicking and coming into place more? And this is something that, we've seen with so many students, and that everyone is really different in this experience. And it seems to be, and I'm going to quote another student, Janessa, because these are her words. And she had this moment where she was working in our group program. And, at first, just like most people, feeling that frustration, maybe things weren't going as quickly as she had hoped. She was learning, but not feeling like it was being internalized, or really coming together. And then at some point it did. And I asked her about that experience, and she said for her, it felt like a culmination and a coming together of all the information. And suddenly it kind of clicked for her. And I thought that was interesting because she had this moment where suddenly everything internalized and there was a deeper knowing, and it just made sense. But that it didn't just come out of thin air. In fact, it came from that education and from learning, but also from implementing in her own life, right? Implementing and repetition and letting more time pass and so forth. And at some point, all those efforts and that time and that repetition kind of came together, and she had that sense of things clicking. So I wanted to share that because it often feels like that happens a little bit out of nowhere, a little bit like a magical moment, when in fact, I think it's really the result of not just that education piece, but also implementing the teachings in our lives and then repeating it and letting more time pass. And all of that coming together. And then at some point it will internalize more and more. And it's much more of a process than it is like a moment to create, if that makes sense. So that, I know that's a lot, so I want to pause there and I want to pass it over to Beth. And what do you think about some of the things that Tasha is saying, and if anything I said kind of resonates?
Yes, so well said, Michelle. I just have a couple things to add. Like what I get from, or the takeaway I get, is that I actually really see a lot of self-awareness, a lot of conscious awareness of what your mind is doing and the process. And a proverb came to mind when you were reading this. I think it's a Chinese proverb, and it goes, "The obstacle is the path."
It's a good one.
And so a lot of times we look at these things as obstacles when they're really just, they're part of the path.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, like it's the repetition, it's the over time, it's those incremental practices of exactly what you're doing, which is recognizing what's going on in your own mind, that will lead to that click, or those ahas, those little mini ahas and clicks. And also, you talked about these very real fears that come up when you're in insomnia. Like, if I live another 50 years, is this going to be my situation? And, like, how long am I going to be dealing with this? Which is completely understandable. But again, when we recognize that we're sort of projecting, those fear thoughts into the future, it's just bringing ourselves back to presence. Like, okay, there's my brain going off into the future, like 50 years of insomnia. But anytime we bring ourselves back, make that practice, it becomes more and more automatic. And you're well on your way to doing that already. And I think just focusing on life as normally as possible, just taking the focus off of insomnia as much as you can, and just living life and focusing on that as much as you can, could also be really helpful.
I love that. No, that's so true. I love the proverb. I love that
The
proverb.
obstacle is the path.
The obstacle is, and it's always the path.
Yeah.
And as you were talking, I was thinking about one of the things I had mentioned earlier on was that intent piece. How she had mentioned, that no matter what she feels like, really her intent is like, to make this go away. Um,
Mhm.
and while she's doing kind of a lot of the right things, that underlying intent might be getting in the way. And the comparison or the example that I thought of was what I see a lot of people kind of struggling with when it comes to befriending wakefulness. And, so for example, a typical example could be that somebody is going to read a book that they enjoy to befriend being up at night. And that's a great idea.
Mhm.
Um, and in the first scenario, somebody can reach for their book and start reading it. And every moment there could be this underlying tension of, okay, how long is it going to take for me to get sleepy?
Mhm.
I read every page that's running. Okay, I'm not sleepy yet. I think it's been 20 minutes. I've been reading for a while. How come I'm not sleepy yet? How long am I supposed to read this book? And on and on. And this underlying feeling likely of tension or
Yeah.
stress while the book is still being read. Whereas on the flip side, another person can grab that book and just kind of get lost in reading the book and
Yeah.
not be too aware of the time or checking in and self-monitoring and all these types of things. And in
Yeah.
those two examples, even though the action of reading the book is exactly the same,
Mhm.
it's actually a completely different outcome.
Mhm.
And emotionally and mentally, it's a completely different activity that's going on. And one will actually kind of add to stress, add to hyperarousal, and the other will kind of actually help bring that down and reinforce safety at night. And so, it's these things are not obvious because we're not used to being aware of our own underlying thought patterns and our own like emotional states. We're not used to any of that. And so often it can be really frustrating to think, well, I'm doing the work. I'm over here. I'm reading the book at night. Why isn't this fixing it? Why isn't this helping when I'm befriending wakefulness over here? And and that's why I provided those two that example as something that might resonate. Is that's why that underlying intent matters, because it's all about our mental and emotional response to what's happening. So if you're observing or welcoming your thoughts, but underneath it all, there's tension and resistance and a desire to just like, I don't even want to be doing this. Let's just fix this as quickly as possible. That's going to have a different mental and emotional energy than if the intent was different. So I want to just put that out there. I completely understand how difficult that is, and that's why all of this stuff is really, it's a practice, and it takes time, and that's okay because it's really outside of our comfort zone. We aren't used to doing any of this stuff. So I think, Tash, what might be helpful is if you kind of could check in with yourself maybe a little bit more as you're doing some of the work you're doing. What's going on in my mind right now? What sort of thoughts are coming up? How are those thoughts making me feel? And start to see if you can become the observer of yourself a little bit more each day, and see what you notice kind of as a starting point. Maybe you'll notice as you're doing these practices that you're doing, like, oh, I'm actually really stressed while I'm doing this, and I'm really trying to resist this, and I hate this, and that can be an interesting piece of information to have and to work with, I think. Because if we at least know what's going on, it can help us take next steps.
Mhm. Yes. Yep.
Definitely. So those were our questions for today. Before I wrap up, Beth, do you have anything to add to any of the folks we've been
No,
help out today?
I'm so glad they wrote in, and these were great questions, and just keep writing in, and that's how we all learn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for your questions today. As always, feel free to let us know in the comments if it was helpful, if you have any follow-up questions, and we'll do our best to respond. So with that, I hope everyone stays well, and we will see you next time. Thanks, Beth, so much for being here today.
Good to see you, Michelle.
All right, take
Okay.
care.
Bye.